Hi, everyone. Welcome to our Managing Expectations During a Pandemic workshop hosted by us, the mental health peers through CAPS. My name is Margot Solvay. I'm a fourth year psych and brain sciences major and an applied psych minor. My pronouns are she, her, hers. And my outreach groups are LGBTQ plus students and international students.
Hi everyone, my name is Veronica Franco. I use she, her, ella pronouns. I am a mental health peer and I've been a peer for about 3 years now. I am also a graduate student of fourth year in the Combined Counseling Clinical and School Psychology program, and my outreach group is graduate students, and I also help coordinate the school anxiety program. Thank you all for joining us today.
Yes, thank you all so much. So here's our agenda. We're going to first have a conversation about current times, just kind of recognizing where we are in COVID right now. Then we're going to talk about control and our need for control during this time. Then we're going to move on to managing disappointment. After that, we're going to have a piece on self-compassion and then gratitude, and then we will end with a guided meditation. So current times. We want to recognize the changing times during COVID-19, how everything seems like it can change in an instant. There are new variants such as Omicron, changing CDC requirements, new obstacles to overcome, and new definitions of safety. We want to recognize that this is difficult for everyone. I don't think there's anyone on this planet right now who has not been in some way affected by this pandemic and who is not experiencing some sort of struggle as a result of this pandemic. Because of the changing requirements, because of the new variants, lots of things had to change even after we thought we had gotten to a place of normalcy again in the fall. But this is not the case, and that means we have to adapt again. And this comes with struggle and this comes with effort. So we want to recognize that it is difficult right now, and you are not alone by any means in struggling with COVID-19 right now. Part of what makes this time really difficult is the multiple roles that we occupy. I think as students and faculty, we're all pursuing academic ambitions that come with both physical and mental requirements. In terms of physical requirements, we're back on campus, which is quite crazy because we were online for half the quarter. And for a lot of people, this means risking safety or having to move back to Isla Vista or making big changes. Whereas for others, it's very exciting. They want to go back in person and they want to be on campus again with people. And a lot of people are in the middle of this. And then with mental requirements, there's a lot that is required to come up with assignments, to do well on exams, to make sure we're keeping up in lectures, when there's not that much structure when it's online. When it's in person, maybe you have the motivation to go in person, but then again, there's that safety piece. So we're all pursuing our academic ambitions, but that can come with difficulty as a result of this pandemic. Another role that people can occupy are being employees. This is really difficult because all of us are in some way, shape, or form trying to maintain financial stability while managing safety and recognizing limits. A lot of people I've had personal experience with have talked to me about how sometimes the people that they work for ask quite a lot of them during this time, despite their safety concerns. So asking someone to come in when they might have been exposed or when they don't feel like it is safe to come in. On the other hand, sometimes they feel as though they're risking their financial stability because of the time that they need to take to isolate or to quarantine as a result of their exposure. So there's a lot of managing safety and trying to figure out what's the right thing to do as an employee in a job. We're also family members, and we're trying to stay connected and safe with our loved ones despite physical barriers. Maybe our family members are in another country or in another state, and despite safety barriers. I think I've heard a lot of situations where people have avoided going to see certain family members for their own safety. Perhaps a family member is a more at-risk person. And so despite how much you may love them, you can't go see them because you don't want to endanger them. Um, so this can be really difficult to navigate. I know a lot of people may have actually gotten COVID from the holidays that they spent all together, and having to make the decision as to whether or not to have a group holiday or not based on safety is a really difficult one to make. Finally, we are community members, and this may be Santa Barbara community, Goleta community, or just community members as a whole in America or even on this planet. We have a duty to protect others from the virus and to do the right thing, but this comes with massive variability. There are lots of different people who have a different way of going at trying to protect each other and themselves. So this can be really difficult. And there are many other roles that people can occupy. What other roles do you think you occupy? You can take a second to think about this or write it down. The final piece I want to say about what we've been talking about is common humanity. This piece of you're not being alone. We are all moving through the stages of a pandemic response. As you can see in this image here, there are 3 stages: survival, acceptance, and growth. And they're all interconnected, and it's very easy to jump from one to the other. It's not necessarily consecutive. It's not as though we can go make it to growth and then all of a sudden we're done. Things are changing all the time. Everything can change in an instant. And so maybe you were once at growth and then we're told we have to go back in person again. Things go back to survival. I feel like I'm unsafe. I'm angry about what's going on. I feel powerless. Or the other way around. Things go back online and I feel like I'm back in survival and I have to manage my time, find ways to make myself feel like I'm doing the best that I can in my academics, despite having not a lot of structure. So a lot of these things can change. But we want to emphasize that everyone is going through this right now and that you are not alone.
So we're going to be talking a little bit about control, our need or craving for having a sense of control, and ways in which we can acknowledge and feel everything that's been coming up these past few months, but these past 2 years living through a pandemic. So control. So we know that our brain works well when there is a sense of stability, a sense of safety, certainty, and control. We seek that predictability, that ability to know what our routine is, what our schedule is, what our day-to-day can look like, and what our future can look like. And so when things become less predictable, we often can experience a strong state of threat. And when we experience a state of threat in our bodies tend to respond with a fight, freeze, or flight response. It's a common response that our body has with perceived and heightened change. And so a constant and prolonged sense of threat can lead to a decrease in motivation, difficulties focusing, ability to incorporate behaviors that are self-soothing and self-calming, having a sense of control or a sense of purpose and meaning. And it can exacerbate our challenges with our overall well-being. And so during this pandemic, I've heard many peers and friends talk about how it feels like we have no control. We have no control of how this pandemic has been unfolding, no control around how our education can look like, no control over what our future is going to look like. And this is such a common experience among many individuals because we are constantly flowing through these ebbs and flows of feeling a sense of control and feeling a sense of unpredictability. I remember last year, the most commonly used word was unprecedented events, right? It was this idea that we didn't expect this and this didn't come up. And as we are navigating this, there's such a need and craving that we have around control. And so this brings up the conversation of uncertainty. And what does it mean to experience uncertainty? And so Uncertainty, when we seek a sense of control, it's a response that we have around needing to feel a sense of safety. And when we talk about safety, safety can be in relation to feeling safe in our bodies, feeling safe in our relationships, or feeling safe in our environments. And so when we put the pandemic into context, right, living through a pandemic, a lot of us have been seeking that need of feeling safe, safe in our health, safe within our relationships, being able to maintain that safety. Perhaps some of us might have members that are immunocompromised or that we worry about because they might be elders or they might be really young and might not have their full defenses up, right? There's also a need around feeling safe with our environment. A lot of us have really grieved the loss of not being on campus for a whole year, or having started and then having this small period of being back on remote, and now we're going back in person, right? And we go back in person with our mask as a way of being safe, safe with ourselves, safe with others. And there's also a loss, right, around that being the new normal, that being the new norm and how we engage in community. And so living through a pandemic and the uncertainty of it all is inherently stressful. We all have been responding to really stressful situations. And many of us have had a hard time coping with the uncertainty of it all. And so during this time, there has been a rise in individuals and students experiencing anxiety, experiencing depression, experiencing a sense of hopelessness and mental health challenges. And a lot of these responses are very normal responses to what have been a very not normal experience these past few years. The American Psychological Association releases quarterly and yearly reports around the stress in America. And in August 2021, 63% of the respondents shared that the uncertainty over the next few months was a big source of stress, and half shared that the pandemic has made it extremely difficult for them to plan and to feel like there is a sense of ability to think about what their future is like. And that's something that I hear a lot around students, that I myself have experienced, right? That the feeling that planning for our future can feel impossible, right? Or it can feel really overwhelming when we're not sure what it's going to look the next month or the next upcoming months. And so how do we navigate this, right? How do we navigate our need for control? How do we navigate the uncertainty of it all? And the first thing we can do is by acknowledging what we have lost, acknowledging that the way in which we envision our college experience to look like has inherently looked different, acknowledging the ways in which we wanted to build community has looked different, right? A lot of people have shared that Zoom and remote things and the internet and social media have been an opportunity to build connection. And at the same time, many have shared that way of connecting doesn't necessarily feel organic, right? It doesn't feel nurturing because there's this need of wanting to be in person, of wanting to engage. And so the first step is really acknowledging, what have you lost? What are you grieving? And whatever you're grieving is a very normal response to us being taken out of what we had perceived as our normal, as our norm. The second step is to recognize your emotions, recognize what is coming up for you. We live in a society where there's often this mantra around, push through things or move on with things or keep going. And while some of these mantras can be helpful at moments, they also send the message that we don't have time to check in with ourselves, that we don't have time to engage with our emotions. And so we are proposing the opposite. We're proposing for you to take the time to recognize the emotions and recognize that often many of us can experience more than one emotion, right? We can experience fear and discomfort and excitement at the same time, right? Or we can experience loss and hopefulness and a sense of gratitude at the same time. And so what is coming up for you? What are the emotions that you're having and experiencing? We also invite you to focus on what is in your control. we can't control this pandemic. We can't control the way it has evolved or the way it will evolve, but we do have control in how we engage in safety and how we engage in joyful moments and how we engage in what is our ability to control our relationships, right? Our ability to be creative. And so rather than focusing on what it's not in our control, let's reframe that to what is in our control. What can I control in this moment? And control can look like you choosing what your meal's going to look like, right? And really engaging in that practice of nurturing and feeding yourself, or it's you making that commitment to engage with community in a way that's going to feel more connecting and true to yourself. We also invite you to acknowledge existing expectations. So what are those expectations that you have of yourself? And how are they helping you? How are they serving you? And how might they make this uncertainty higher? Many of us had this expectation that we were going to work really hard and continue to plan our future as we had envisioned it. And we're having a really hard time being flexible with the recognition that some of those expectations need to change, right? Or have changed. So acknowledge what are those expectations and then assess what are the ways in which we can create more curiosity and flexibility in them so that they are working in our favor rather than exacerbating this need, right, of not being in control. And then develop a practice of self-compassion, of gratitude or ritual. And we'll be talking a little bit more about this in the upcoming slides. And then there's one more quote that I wanted to share with you all that I came across where Ali shared, everyone has experienced a loss during the pandemic, whether it be the loss of a loved one, the loss of a job, of community, of routine, or the loss of a milestone celebration. And so give yourself the opportunity to really feel and process that loss that you have experienced. We've all experienced and lost things and people and experiences and moments during this pandemic, and we are deserving of being able to slow down and acknowledge the challenges and struggles that have come with the pandemic.
So next we're going to talk about managing disappointment. I think disappointment has become a big part of the pandemic, just because a lot of things haven't gone the way maybe we had planned, trips being canceled, future plans having to be changed as a result of changing times. So disappointment is, I think, a very important feeling that comes with dealing with this pandemic. So understanding disappointment, there's a few things about disappointment that I think are kind of really good to be aware of. First, I think it's important to know that it's very common. Disappointment is an unavoidable part of life and that it affects no one. I don't think I've ever met anyone who hasn't at some point in their lives been disappointed by something. Um, Sometimes disappointment can come as a result of a reality that didn't meet expectations. So this can be an expectation for yourself, an expectation for your future plans. Maybe it was an expectation for a gap year and you wanted to travel and then COVID hit and suddenly we can't even leave our homes. There's lots of things that can lead to that. Um, One thing that I think is kind of helpful to keep in mind if disappointment is something that has been coming often in people's lives is that high expectations can be harmful if they're too high and if they're too often and if they're perhaps unrealistic. But in some ways, they're also a reflection of ambition, of optimism, and in confidence in oneself. Maybe someone expected that fall quarter would that winter quarter would be just like fall quarter and it would be completely in person and that we would be able to manage the variant well or that it wouldn't come to the US or something. There's expectations that were maybe had that everything would be okay and it didn't turn out that way, but maybe that was a reflection of confidence in the CDC or confidence in our ability to keep each other safe. So I think it's important to not beat oneself up, even if someone's high expectations are higher than maybe they need to be. Passion. Feeling disappointed shows that you cared about something, that you cared about a subject, event, person, or situation. There was something that mattered, and it didn't happen. It didn't happen how it was supposed to, and that's horrible. But I think it's beautiful to see that there was value in that person, in that subject, in that event, whatever it was that was held on to. Comfort zones. Often disappointment is felt as a result of pushing oneself out of one comfort zone. So let's say you're trying to get a job, you're putting yourself out there, you're really taking the step. And maybe it doesn't turn out how you wanted it to, but it can uh, really be an opportunity for growth, which I'll talk about next, but also shows that you made an effort, you showed up, and that's almost the most important part. Um, Opportunity for growth. Experiencing disappointment allows one to reevaluate expectations about oneself and the environment. So, seeing that something didn't work out how you wanted it to allows for mistakes to be learned from, or for expectations to be reevaluated in a way that's more realistic. Um, it allows us to think about circumstances in different ways, whether the trust that we're putting in circumstances are maybe just not within our control as we thought they were going to be, and that's okay. So it really allows for learning, I think. Learning on how to do something, how to do it differently, what can be done to avoid the disappointment or to manage it better. I think it leads to an opportunity for introspection. And finally, resilience. Practicing recovering from disappointment and evaluating what led to it can help strengthen your ability to deal with more challenges in the future. It's almost like working out. It's a skill that I think can be practiced and can be worked on, and then that muscle gets stronger and stronger to where resilience is a huge part of your life that comes up when you need it. So there's a lot of ways in which disappointment can be understood and reframed. So, managing disappointment. Disappointment happened. Something didn't happen the way it was supposed to. How do we manage that? First, I want to talk about the feeling aspect. So, it's really important not to ignore or bottle these feelings. Um, this doesn't make them go away. If anything, it probably makes it worse because they fester and there's no outlet. And so other things can get in the way of that, and it can really affect your quality of life. So allow yourself to feel disappointment. Feelings are valid. Give yourself permission to react, even if it's something as small as not being able to go to a certain cafe that you like getting cupcakes from because they're closed because of COVID. Um, that is still a loss. It's a routine. It's a part of your day that was maybe important to you. Like, there's nothing that is too small to be disappointed about, and something that is too small to be acknowledged. Like, I think no matter how small it appears, it's okay to feel loss, and it is okay to feel disappointed. So, really making sure that you're allowing yourself to feel, you're being curious about those feelings. What's going on? And that kind of goes into the get perspective piece. So it's important to let your feelings out, experience them, and then also reach out to your support system. Have a conversation with them about how you feel while you're disappointed, um, and see what insight they can offer you. And then I think insight into one's own self is really important. I think it's important to ask yourself what happened? What expectations did you have? Where did they fall short? Why? How does that make you feel? And what could you do differently next time? I think feeling disappointment is a really good opportunity for introspection, to analyze how one lives their life and what can be done differently to help avoid feelings that are uncomfortable, like disappointment. But they're just that, they're uncomfortable. And I think it's important to remember that they will pass, but that it is important to feel them fully. second part of managing disappointment is moving on. I think a really important piece that we'll talk about later in this presentation as well is identifying the good, having gratitude for what is still good in your life, what you can be thankful for. I think often we can get caught in the moment of disappointment and feeling as though we've really lost it all. But by taking a second after you've processed your feelings and let them come out, taking a second to realize, like, okay, there are still some things out there that I can be grateful for, that are still out there to support me, that I can still use as a springboard to move on to something else. So identifying the good, I think, can be really helpful for moving on. Um, Second, I think focusing on self-care, doing something soothing to help oneself when they're in this disappointment, something that will help channel that energy or really help you relax. And either it's a distraction or it's a conversation with a friend or something that you know is soothing to you. I think that can really be helpful for moving on and managing that disappointment. Reframing is really helpful. How has this disappointment made room for growth? How can we take something from the disappointment and apply that to something else? Like, how is it a helpful piece, even if it was really difficult to deal with? And then finally, try again. I think just because we're in a pandemic, it doesn't mean that we can't get creative about how to recreate routines, trips, classes, all these things that we really held on to. How do we achieve that in a way that is safe and feasible, that can achieve the same feeling, the same goal? So whether this means moving something in person, whether this means doing something outside, whether this means trying a different bakery, if we're going back to the cupcake example. I think there's ways to where we don't have to give up on the thing that we cared about. We can get creative and we can try again. So here we want to leave space for people to identify where they have been, how they have been disappointed, what has happened during COVID that was a loss, and leave space and time for that to be processed and felt.
Now we're going to be talking a little bit about self-compassion and ways in which we can give ourselves the same kindness and care we give to others, whether it's a friend or a family member or an individual, right? We're really good at extending compassion to others. So we're going to talk a little bit about ways in which we can extend that compassion to ourselves. And we're going to start by talking about what is self-compassion. So Dr. Kristen Neff is the pioneer of self-compassion. She first introduced it in the early 2000s and defined self-compassion as extending the same compassion and empathy to yourself that you do to others, such as a family member or friend. We're really good at extending grace and kindness and empathy to others when they're experiencing difficult situations or moments of struggle or suffering. But oftentimes we don't extend that to ourselves. Oftentimes we tend to be really critical or very rigid or hard on ourselves. So she identified 3 elements of self-compassion. And so she talks about the importance of self-kindness versus self-judgment. And self-kindness entails acting with kindness towards ourselves when we fail, when we suffer, or we feel inadequate. So this can look like, for example, if you don't do so well on a midterm, right? Oftentimes we can beat ourselves up and we can have thoughts around, I should have studied harder, or I should have prepared more, or I shouldn't have taken that break. There's a lot of shoulds, a lot of self-judgment. And so the idea with self-kindness is, what are ways in which you can extend that kindness? So what are ways in which you would respond to a friend who received a C on a midterm, right? You probably wouldn't say you should have studied more. You would probably respond with, you tried, right? Given the circumstances, you did the best you could. And there's value in recognizing that. And so the idea with self-kindness is ways of extending that towards yourself. She also talks about common humanity versus isolation. And this is a reminder that by being able to recognize the common humanity around, we all experience challenges, we all experience moments of suffering, of feeling inadequate. I will even go as far as saying that being in academia, we've all experienced moments of feeling imposter syndrome, right? And so by being able to find the common humanity, we're able to expand our experience, not only to ourselves, but to recognize that we're not alone in these moments of challenge or suffering. And she also talks about mindfulness versus over identification. And so, what mindfulness entails is making sure that our emotions are not suppressed, that we bring awareness to them, but that also we don't over exaggerate them, right? And what I mean by that is that we don't over identify, over hang on to them, right? Oftentimes when we feel this disappointment, we tend to grasp onto that really tightly, and sometimes that can lead to stuckness. It can lead to us feeling like there's no sense of change. And so the idea with mindfulness is in creating a practice in which we can identify our emotions, right? That we can look at them in a non-judgmental way. Oftentimes there's conversations around good and bad emotions. And the reality is that emotions aren't bad or good, right? Emotions are emotions. Feeling disappointment is an emotion. Feeling happiness is an emotion. Feeling excitement is an emotion, but neither of them are good or bad. They're emotions. And so that practice with mindfulness is bringing awareness to them and allowing for an opportunity for you to identify them and become aware of how you experience them in your body. And so we're going to be talking about ways in which we can treat ourselves with that kindness and fairness. I do want to say that self-compassion is one of those concepts and practices that has become quite well known, but it's quite a difficult practice because it's a practice. It's this new way of interacting with ourselves, this new way of connecting with ourselves, that if we don't engage in that practice, it can feel quite uncomfortable. It can feel unfamiliar. It might even feel a little weird because we're introducing a new way of responding to ourselves, of viewing ourselves. And there's actually a lot of research that suggests that a lot of our thoughts tend to be from a negative perspective. We tend to be really hard on ourselves. There's often the saying that we can be our own toughest critic. And so to incorporate the practice of self-compassion can be quite difficult when we have this norm, right? We have this script around being really judgmental and really rigid towards ourselves. But there's ways in which we can continue to practice that. And there's also so much research now that shows the benefits of self-compassion. So incorporating self-compassion during this pandemic can really help us manage the stress of the virus, right? The uncertainty of it all. It can lessen feelings of loneliness and reduce the guilt of relaxing more or the guilt of wanting for more connection. And so I found this really good little Snapchat around how practicing self-compassion can actually help us move from that fight, flight, or freeze response that I was talking earlier, right? Earlier we talked about when our bodies have this perceived change, this perceived a thread, it'll take us into a flight or fight or freeze response. And by practicing self-compassion, it can help us move into a way in which we can respond kinder to that response rather than induce that stress response. So oftentimes when someone goes into a fight response, there tends to be a lot of self-criticism, right? There tends to be a lot of critique about how we engage and how we are responding to the situation or the perceived threat. And what self-compassion suggests is that when we have that fight response, that if we meet it with kindness, we have a stronger ability of gearing our paranervous sympathetic nervous system into a response that's more calm, a response that makes us feel more equipped to manage it because we're meeting it with a very different voice rather than that self-criticism. When we enter, for those that notice that when there's perceived threat or change, there's a flight response, that often can lead to isolation. It can lead to loneliness. It can lead to this experience of no one will ever ever relate or understand what I'm experiencing. And so with self-compassion, what the practice is suggesting is that when that flight response is triggered, seek the common humanity, seek that community, seek that reminder that you're not alone in these experiences. And that by having that feeling and believing that you're not alone, you're more likely to reach out, right? You're more likely to be connected, more likely to be in support or have a network of support. And then there's also the freeze response. And the freeze response can often lead to rumination. It can lead to spiral thinking around the situation, on how we've been managed or responding to this pandemic, on how motivated or how not motivated we've been, right? And it can become a really long, dark hole of ruminating around all our decisions or all our ways of showing up, all our ways of interacting. And it can be quite exhausting, if I'm honest. And so what self-compassion is suggesting is practice mindfulness, right? Bring attention to the emotion, bring attention to the experience. Meet it, right? With self-compassion, without judgment, without criticism, without labels. Mindfulness is really big on not labeling, right? But rather just being aware. And by being able to have that awareness, by being able to bring that attention, then you're also able to move from it, rather than staying on that rumination, on that spiraling. And so I invite you all to ask yourselves, what do I need in this moment to bring me a little closer to self-compassion? Might you need self-kindness? Might you need the reminder of common humanity? Might you need some mindfulness? What is it that you need at this moment? Now we can talk about a few practices of self-compassion. So the first one is soothing touch. And this is something that we've briefly talked about earlier, right? Finding something soothing. So touch is often a way in which we can extend a sense of safety and comfort to ourselves. And so think about, what do I need to feel safe and comforted? For some folks, that can look like placing a hand on their heart. For others, it can look like placing their hand on their cheek, right? For others, it can look like placing their hands together and then being connected. So explore the touch that makes you feel a sense of safety. We have the power of reminding ourselves that we have moments in which we feel a sense of safety, a sense of comfort. And by being able to identify the soothing touch that feels comfortable for you, you're giving yourself a gift, right? A gift of being able to remind yourself of that. I also want to note that what might feel soothing for me might not feel soothing for you, and that's okay. Part of this practice is exploring what works for you, right? What feels soothing, what feels like it's organic for you. We could also practice the self-compassion break. And if you go into Dr. Kristen Neff's website, you can find kind of the guided scripture around this. But the self-compassion break essentially is a practice around applying mindfulness, common humanity, and kindness when difficulty arises in our lives. And so it helps you walk through acknowledging that difficulty, remembering the common humanity in that difficulty, ways in which we can extend the kindness and the mindfulness. And it takes usually about 5 to 10 minutes, but it's a really nice practice to develop because it gives us that break from falling into that automatic script of judgment, of criticism. There's also the compassionate movement. And what this means is giving yourself the opportunity to look inside and outside of your body, right? So notice, by you bringing movement into your body, you have the opportunity to take a look inside of where in your body is your body carrying that tension and ease. There's been a lot more conversations of mental health, right, during this pandemic. And something that has really come up is how our bodies are our vessels, right? And our bodies are so good at telling us when we're feeling stress, when we're feeling a sense of threat, when we're feeling a sense of uncertainty. Oftentimes, I've had people share, I feel a lot of tension in my neck, or I feel lower back pain, or I feel tension in my chest. And oftentimes that tension is associated to our feelings, to our emotions, to the ways in which we are experiencing the external world. And so by bringing compassionate movement in, you're becoming more aware and developing that language with your body, right? You're learning how to communicate and identify those signs and signals that our body sends to us on a daily. And then the last practice is joy. Being able to integrate moments of joy that lift your heart, right? Think about what brings you joy, right? Oftentimes, when we are going through challenging moments, through moments of suffering, it can feel like there is no light at the end of the tunnel, right? And so what self-compassion suggests is integrate little moments of joy, little moments of light. This can look like going to the cupcake store, like Margot was talking about, right? Or it can look like buying yourself that cup of coffee that you really enjoy. Or it can look like having a FaceTime call with a friend or catching up with a friend. It doesn't have to be long. It doesn't have to be your whole day. It can be a few minutes within the day, but integrating that practice of joy can help create a lot of agency and a lot of empowerment, resiliency that we're able to navigate and continue to move and cope through this pandemic, through this current moment we're living through.
Gratitude. So gratitude is a piece that I think is kind of largely related to self-compassion as well. They can be similar in ways, but it's, I think, a really important way to deal with managing expectations and deal with disappointment and deal with just generally the common feelings that have been coming up during this pandemic. I think it's a really helpful tool, and a way to cope, honestly, that I think is very useful. So, what is gratitude? I don't think I don't think gratitude is a new term to most people, but I do think that there are some misconceptions about gratitude. So first, I don't think this will come as a surprise. It is identifying the good in one's life. It's a self-soothing practice that um, has been found to have many physical and mental health benefits. Um, and it's a feeling and a skill that one must practice and work up to. So notice the word practice being said twice here. It's not just something that someone is necessarily born with and then they have the same amount their entire life, or they're not born with it and they don't know how to practice gratitude at all. It's like a meditation. It's like a skill. It's like a workout. It's something you have to practice towards and keep up. Um, and that kind of changes the perspective on it a little bit. It makes it feel less like something that, and you'll see it in the what it isn't section. It's not something that we should necessarily be doing. Like, you should be grateful. It's more so like something we can do, something that feels right, and something that doesn't necessarily have to make you feel guilty or have to discredit the negative emotions that we're feeling. So, to speak on this, what it isn't is toxic positivity. So, this is forcing positive emotions on oneself when that's not really how you actually feel, or not really how your friend actually feels, or anyone in your life. Um, it still means you are allowed to feel your emotions, feel them to the fullest, and process them in a way that feels right to you. Um, Gratitude is something that can come alongside that or afterwards. It doesn't have to cover the negative emotions. There should be no element of forcing this upon oneself. It also isn't comparing oneself to others. I think often sometimes what people can do when they think of gratitude is to think about how others have it worse than they have it. And comparing oneself at all comes with many issues. It can come with general self-esteem issues, having a difficulty detaching oneself from their idea of what they should be like, what they should be grateful for, what it's just this comparing that doesn't really help bring pure gratitude, it comes with some baggage that I think is not always helpful. And finally, the piece that I think I personally have struggled with, and I think a lot of people do, is the should statements when exploring gratitude and one's feelings. I'm having a really horrible day, but I should be grateful because I live in Santa Barbara. So, yes, you can be grateful that you live in Santa Barbara, but does that gratitude mean that you're not allowed to feel the way you are feeling? No, that's not what that means. So these are a few things that help define gratitude, but also kind of show um, ways in which gratitude has sometimes been taken and molded into something else that can invalidate one's own feelings and invalidate others' feelings if we're not being clear about what we're being grateful for and why we're being grateful for it. So, gratitude during COVID. Practicing gratitude looks different for everyone in times of uncertainty. Not everyone has access to the same things during COVID. Not everyone um, can show their gratitude in the same way and feel that gratitude at the same time. There's a lot of variability in how and what and who we can be grateful for. And so there's no right way to be grateful. Um, Ultimately, though, it's finding a way to remain hopeful about there being a change, about there being something greater, something, um, a light at the end of this tunnel that can sometimes seem really dark, by having that gratitude, by seeing that there are lots of people out there who are doing their best to help figure out how we can best manage this pandemic, that there are beautiful things still in the world that we can look at and bring joy and gain joy from. So there's ways in which I feel like gratitude can help people get through the really dark times, the times that seem like it's a never-ending hole. I think gratitude is a way to help people come out or at least see that there is a light out there. Um, Something that we can be grateful for as well for gratitude during COVID is that I think to a certain extent, COVID has helped people turn towards spirituality or whatever that looks like to them. I think being in a time of uncertainty leads people to realize that sometimes you just have to have faith. And faith doesn't have to be in a certain God or a certain any entity in particular. But I think we can be grateful for the fact that people are turning inward, um, towards spirituality and defining what that looks like to them, being a practice, maybe meditation, maybe an opportunity to connect with nature, that being their form of spirituality. So there's a emphasis on the inside that I think we can be grateful for that has come with COVID. Um, with this comes the need to take breaks, recognizing that need. That I think came with the beginning of COVID when all of a sudden everything stopped. There was this idea that, wow, maybe we needed that breath. Maybe we needed to take a second and slow down, let go of this pushing through mentality, and really take a second to observe what is possible, what are my limits, how do I feel mentally, how do I feel physically. So I think we can be grateful for the recognizing the need to take breaks that has kind of come on a personal level, but also on a little bit of a systemic level as a country, as a population. I think there's been a bit of a shift in that respect. And then, as I said earlier, increased introspection in the face of new obstacles and feelings. We have to reevaluate expectations. We have to observe our feelings and manage them in the face of new obstacles, in the face of new requirements. So I feel like while a lot of it has to do with struggle, the fact that people are taking more time to look inward to help manage that struggle is something we can be grateful and is something that can be alleviated with by gratitude. So, and I'm sure there's many, many more things we can be grateful for during COVID. because each person is different and each person has had a different experience with COVID and a growth through COVID. But it can be a really helpful tool. So ways to practice gratitude. There's lots of different ways to practice gratitude, and it looks completely different for different people. I think a classic example that is explained a lot is journaling and keeping a gratitude journal. This can help you keep track of the good. It can also help for like self-exploration, for exploring what you're grateful for. Um, it can be really helpful to just kind of word vomit onto a page and see where it takes you. And it's an intimate, personal journal that can really help improve your life. There's been a lot of studies done on gratitude journaling, and it seems to have come up with a lot of benefits. So that's one way to practice gratitude. Another way is with others, letting others know their importance in your life. Maybe sending that email to your coworker, letting them know, hey, the help you gave me was really important to me, and I'm really thankful that you did that. Or to a family member, letting them know that they're very important and close to you. Um, Thanking parents for their support or caregivers for their support. So there's ways to connect with others in a way that can show gratitude. And this doesn't just have to be verbal, it can be through gift giving, through different love languages. So that's one way to do so. Another way is to reframe experiences, practicing gratitude about experiences, about things that were hard, things that were difficult, or things that were wonderful and were an experience that really left you feeling joy. Being able to take those experiences and learn from them, see how they were useful to you, regardless of how difficult they may have been, can really be a way to practice gratitude as well. Kind of showing that there's, even in difficult times, there are things we can take and be grateful for. Finally, I think one piece that's really important is to practice gratitude with the self. Find gratitude for yourself in many different ways. It can be through meditation or during another practice, maybe in your journal. It's not necessarily has to be a gratitude journal. It could just be your own journal where you are recollecting your day or how you feel about yourself, and be able to identify parts of yourself that you can be grateful for. I think this ties a lot into the self-compassion piece. Um, but I think it's important to be grateful for oneself and one's resilience during such a difficult time, um, because we really are going through something that is unprecedented. And I think the fact that we're all still here and showing up and trying our best is something we can all be thankful for, because it really takes a lot of energy and it takes a lot of resilience to do so. How else can we practice gratitude? Now that we've thought about different ways to do so, maybe take a second to think about, what are you thankful for? This can be done in your head, can be written down. You can send it to a friend, kind of all the different ways we talked about, but what are you thankful for?
We're reaching the later part, the ending of our time together, and we wanted to end with a meditation, particularly around helping you all develop a gratitude and a self-compassion script. So I will be guiding you all through it. So I invite you to take a moment to get comfortable in your seat. As you adjust your body, notice any physical sensations you're experiencing. Notice where your body touches the chair, where your feet touch the floor. And I invite you to notice your breath as it enters and leaves the body. Where is this sensation most obvious to you? Do you feel your breath in your nostrils, in your chest? Take some time to notice your breath. And if you're comfortable, I invite you to close your eyes or to find a place in front of you where you can focus your vision. And as you continue to tune into your body, notice your breath Notice the sensations. Our bodies are our home, the vessels through which we experience the world. Whether that is a sensation of our breath, the feeling of the chair, or the world beneath us, the sound we hear, or the thoughts we have. Our thoughts come so quickly and naturally. You might have already noticed some of these thoughts since the beginning of this exercise. Maybe some of these thoughts are around, am I doing this right? Or maybe it's around, when will this be over? Or maybe there isn't nothing to look forward to. Or am I failing at this? Thoughts, just like breath, sound, and other sensations, come and go. Thoughts are natural, they're automatic. Although we cannot choose our automatic thoughts, we can choose to focus our attention on kind and compassionate thoughts. We have the agency to choose. One way to do this is to focus on gratitude. I invite you to take a moment to think of one thing for which you are grateful. This could be something big or small. It could be gratitude for a person who loves you, or something kind someone did for you, or just a moment where you got to laugh or make someone else laugh, experience joy. And as you're thinking about this, say, I am feeling grateful for. See if you can relive that moment for a second as you think about this. What do you see? What do you feel? What do you hear? Where in your body do you feel it? Now, we're going to try to turn that gratitude towards ourselves. You can start with your body. What is something your body can do that you may take for granted, but for which you are grateful for? Maybe this is the way your body can move or the abilities you possess. As you think about this, say, I am grateful that my body can, and fill the blank. Notice what you feel. Notice how your body takes that in. Now, you can extend this gratitude to another part of you, maybe more of a subtle ability you have. Gratitude towards yourself for the way and perhaps how you handle difficult situations, or the kindness you extended to others and yourself, or your dedication to social justice, or being hardworking, or caring for your loved ones, or practicing safety in a way that's congruent with you. Gratitude for the way in which you've been navigating and responding to this pandemic, to the transition to remote, to back in person, to back in remote. Think about some of your abilities that you typically forget or take for granted, and say to yourself, I am grateful that, fill in the blank. Now I'm going to invite you to take a moment to refocus on your body. Bring awareness to your body. Notice your physical sensations again, how they come and go like the breath. Thoughts are just like this. They are automatic, and sometimes they are uncomfortable or unkind. But we can also choose to focus on things for which we feel grateful, both outside ourselves and within ourselves. This gratitude, this practice builds our compassion, which we can help heal ourselves, heal others, and help us navigate challenging situations. So as you feel ready, I invite you to open your eyes and take a look at your surroundings. Welcome back. I invite you to take a few moments to jot down, how did that feel? What came up for you? Thank you so much.
Thank you, Veronica, for that beautiful guided meditation. That was really, really nice. I really enjoyed that.
Of course.
And thank you everyone for joining us. We hope this was a helpful presentation for you all. We would encourage you to fill out our workshop feedback survey that I think we can link or email to you if you are watching this at a later date. But feel free to follow us on Instagram and Facebook at UCSB Mental Health Peers. And we thank you for your participation.
Thank you.